Hey Star Trek fans, welcome to the latest episode of the Star Trek Picard Deep Dive. This one is for the fourth episode, Absolute Candor, written by Michael Chabon and directed by Jonathan Frakes. Before we get to the credits, we are introduced to the world of Vashti, which is a human settlement that has been taking in Romulan refugees, and we see Picard's visit there 14 years earlier, just before the synths' attack on Mars. Now, Vashti would seem to be named after the Persian princess, which can be found in the Bible in the book of Esther. What relation this has to the theme or any kind of hidden symbolism, I'm not sure myself, but it is definitely an interesting connection. During the introduction scene to this planet, we see some Romulans playing with the Romulan tarot cards that Ramda was using in the previous episode. This is kind of showing that they're definitely a part of Romulan culture that we will be seeing more of, I'm sure, throughout Picard. We get introduced to the Qowat Milat, who are a group of Romulan warrior nuns, as bizarre as that sounds. I think this is a really cool addition to Romulan backstory. Romulans aren't a race that we've gotten a lot of backstory on, even though they technically are Star Trek's oldest adversaries that are still a going concern in the franchise. So I love that we're getting all of this world building that we never really got over the years in Star Trek. Even though the Romulans have lost their world, interestingly enough, we're getting more world building for them. So very cool. I think the Qowat Milat are an interesting addition, and I'm eager to learn more of them through the character of Elnor, who will join Picard's quest over the course of this episode. The philosophy of the Qowat Milat, Absolute Candor, is where we get the title of the episode. This philosophy requires them to not have any sort of filter between thought and speech when it comes to completely unfiltered emotion. And we see that kind of play out here where Picard is talking about his dislike of children, and Elnor is very frank and forthright, even for a child, when talking to Picard. And this is all part of their belief system and how they approach the world, which is definitely interesting. I like that it runs completely counter to what we know of the Romulans generally, which is that they are, as a race, as a rule, fairly secretive and not forthcoming. We get the credits, and we see that this episode is directed by Jonathan Frakes. Jonathan Frakes, of course, played Commander William T. Riker in Star Trek The Next Generation and the TNG films. He also directed a number of episodes of TNG, DS9, Voyager, and now Discovery and Picard. After the credits, we're back aboard the La Sirena, and Dr. Girardi complains that she tried to watch some holos, but all that Captain Rios has aboard the ship are Klingon operas, to which he responds that it's a long story. Wondering if we'll get that story or not. Regardless, Klingon opera is a musical form that we've seen referenced many times in Star Trek, starting with The Next Generation. It was a particular favorite of the character of Worf, and we even get to hear him perform it a number of times. We also see that aboard the La Sirena, Picard has a holographic simulation of his vineyard and chateau, which means those points in the trailer where we saw Picard back in the vineyard and at the chateau, talking to characters who are only introduced later and in scenes that obviously take place after what we've seen already, we all assumed, oh, he's going back home at some point for some reason. But those sneaky people over at CBS, they tricked us, and in fact, this would appear to be where those scenes are set. So nice. It was added a little bit of confusion to the trailers, which was definitely threw things off as far as predictions go. So that was kind of a neat discovery. In this scene, we are also introduced to yet another of Captain Rios's holograms that bear his likeness. This one is the hospitality hologram. I particularly love Captain Rios's reaction to this hologram. It's interesting that there are so many holograms aboard that have his likeness, and it definitely adds extra weight to his line when he says,
"In general, the captain keeps his own company."
That's certainly true in more ways than one, it would seem. We also get introduced to another hologram later in the episode, Emmett, who is the security and tactical hologram. Interestingly, this is the only hologram we've seen so far that actually has a name, or at least has been referred to by a name. And I get the feeling that while the captain seems to be a very introspective person who keeps to himself, my guess is that when and if he does become very lonely, this hologram is the one that he activates to kind of hang out with and maybe have a drink or two with or something like that. And maybe it's the closest one that he has to a friend. They definitely seem closest personality-wise. This scene mostly serves as an exposition dump. We learn a number of things about the status quo of the planet Vashti and the sector in which it sits, notably that the area is under the protection of something called the Fenris Rangers. Now, the Rangers are only one thing that kind of lend a sort of Lord of the Rings fantasy type feel to this episode, which is definitely interesting for Star Trek, but also that name, Fenris Rangers. Fenris, interestingly, is a wolf from mythology and has some interesting connections to Romulus and Remus, which I'm not an expert in, but if you watch our live show, Brandy covered those quite expertly during that discussion. So if you haven't checked that out, please check that out. I think it was a really great discussion. And they're really reaching into kind of the mythology for names and stuff, kind of in the tradition of Romulus and Remus, originally for the twin worlds of the Romulan Star Empire, and of course Vulcan and all of those mythological terms that have been appropriated by Star Trek. So this is kind of continuing in that tradition, it feels like. In this scene, we also learn about something called the Romulan Rebirth Movement. We don't get a lot of information about it, but it would seem to be a Romulan nationalistic movement, possibly based on Romulan supremacy or something like that. We do see a symbol worn by a couple of background actors later in the episode. My guess would be that this symbol is the symbol of the Romulan Rebirth Movement. The camera does linger on them for a little while, and the music seems to be a little ominous, so I'm guessing that's where they're going with this. I'm also assuming that we're going to learn more about this group as the series goes on. We rejoin the artifact where Soji is reviewing some information about Ramda, the Romulan woman that she spoke with in the previous episode. She's on a Romulan talk show talking about Ganmadan, which is kind of Romulan Armageddon by the sounds of it, in which the Destroyer, on the day of annihilation, calls the demons who unshackle their chains in answer of the Destroyer's call. It's pretty clear that we're assuming Soji to be the Destroyer, at least Ramda and her fellow ex-Borg Romulans seem to think that that's the case, as do Narek and his sister, who are still plotting to try and discover where Soji came from. So definitely getting a few more pieces to this background story. Very slowly, though. I find myself kind of wishing that this part of the story would accelerate a little bit and we'd learn a little bit more quickly what's going on here. But it seems that the pace that they've set is going to continue, at least in this episode. We then get a scene with Narek and Soji in their off hours in what appears to be kind of a lounge or bar aboard the artifact. If you look closely, the beverage that they are sharing is Romulan ale, and the bottle they're drinking from bears a striking resemblance to the bottle that McCoy gifts Kirk in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, the very first time we see Romulan ale. A very nice touch, showing some distinctive bottles from Star Trek's past here. The fact that they're high on Romulan ale might also explain the supposed Borg ritual that they take part in shortly thereafter. On their way to take part in the Borg ritual, as they call it, Narek and Soji discuss Soji's arrival on the artifact aboard a ship called the Ellison. The Ellison would seem to be named after Harlan Ellison, noted science fiction writer, and also the writer of the TOS episode The City on the Edge of Forever. Watch carefully, approximately around timestamp 22 minutes and 20 seconds, you'll notice that Soji moves her head in a very Data-like way, that signature kind of head tilt that Data did in Star Trek The Next Generation. While down on Vashti, apparently Raffi is monitoring social media on the planet when Picard begins to blow up with lots of mentions. It seems that he may be trending on Vashti Twitter. This is interesting. They don't outright call it social media. They say that he's blowing up on private communications, but this might be the first indication of a social media type infrastructure in Star Trek. Approaching the La Sirena is a Romulan bird of prey, an early one from the 23rd century, piloted by noted warlord Candor. Now, the Romulan bird of prey was first seen in the original series episode Balance of Terror. It was also later seen in the TOS episode The Deadly Years, as well as the remastered version of the Enterprise incident. This would appear to be a slightly upgraded version of the original bird of prey, but the distinctive lines are very familiar, as is the hint of a large painted bird of prey on the underside of the hull. As Picard is attempting to convince Elnor to bind his sword to his quest, they discuss the fact that the mission revolves around the offspring of Data. Elnor remembers Picard talking about Data and brings up his pet cat, Spot. Spot, of course, we have seen in multiple episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation. He, or she, depending on the episode you're talking about, was Data's cat from episodes 4 through 7, as well as the TNG films. After being initially rejected by Elnor, Picard goes to a bar to seemingly pick a fight with the Romulans. During this scene, we learn a little bit more about the backstory of the Romulan rescue mission and all of the things that kind of went wrong. Now, those of you who have read the novel The Last Best Hope by Una McCormick will learn a lot about this rescue mission as well, and some of those details are referenced in this scene, such as the Wallenberg-class transports that were used to transport Romulan refugees. I really do recommend that you check out this novel. It is a great companion piece to the series, and Una McCormick is an excellent Star Trek writer. Please, if you do get the chance, check this book out. It's also Star Trek's first hardcover in quite some time. And finally, at the very end of the episode, with the La Sirena under attack by the Romulan bird of prey, an unknown vessel comes to its rescue, with a daring pilot taking on the Romulan bird of prey and eventually helping our heroes to overcome the ship. However, in the process, the ship is heavily damaged and destroyed. The La Sirena is able to beam the pilot out, however, and it is somebody very familiar to Star Trek fans, notably Star Trek Voyager fans, 7 of 9, tertiary adjunct of Unimatrix 01. But Picard, you may call her
7 of 9.
During this brief introduction of her at the end of the episode, she gives a very characteristic 7 of 9 head tilt that we've seen a lot in Star Trek Voyager. She's really inhabiting this character, even though there's only the one line from her, and I really can't wait to see more of her in upcoming episodes. I do also have to say that some people have pointed out that when she's beamed in, there are a few notes of the Star Trek Voyager theme that are played and incorporated into the music of the episode. I could not hear it myself, so I dug into this a little bit more. If you look on the original soundtrack that was recently released, you can find those few notes of the Voyager theme that were meant to kind of be on this part. However, thanks to pacing and cutting and timing issues, that is not in the final episode. However, the composer Jeff Russo does tell us to stay tuned, so I'm assuming in upcoming episodes when 7 of 9 is on screen, we may hear just a little bit of that Voyager theme. Well, that's what I had this week for Hidden Bits and Canon Connections in Episode 4, Absolute Candor. How about you? Did you catch anything I missed? Please let me know in the comments below. Thank you to the Patreon supporters for their help in bringing these videos to you. I really do appreciate it. And thank you to everyone else for liking, sharing, and subscribing. And most of all, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I'll see you all in the next video. And until then, Jolon True.